Hello and welcome to another audiobook. Today we are beginning 1:35 a.m. So I've already done Room for One More and The New Kid, which are the two other stories in this book, but I haven't yet done 1:35 a.m. So we're going to begin that today. I have already read this one, so I do know what the ending is, and I know what the story is like. As you can see, I've highlighted a lot. It's just for my notes, really. I highlight every story, just the key parts, so that I get a good understanding of it when I go through it again. And there's key lore points and stuff. But this is one of the good things about having a Kindle reader. I wouldn't highlight a paperback book. So we're going to be beginning this today. And hopefully you enjoy. I did enjoy this story. I think it's quite good. Again, it takes a while to get into it, but once you get into it, it's really good. So let's begin. Oh yeah, the other thing is, there's this old woman. No, I'm not going to spoil it, but there's this old woman who sings a lot. So I'm gonna try and do some voice acting too. Wish me luck.
Oh hooray, Buzzy, Buzzy, Buzzy,
sang a loud, tinkling voice. The inane song reached, like a long-handled hook, into Delilah's enjoyable dream and yanked her from the blessed retreat of sleep. "What the?" Delilah muttered as she sat up in the middle of her rumpled flannel sheets, blinking at the sun punching through gaps in her louvered blinds. You make me feel so perky," the singer continued. Delilah threw her pillow at the inadequate wall that separated her apartment from the one next door. The pillow made a satisfying thump when it hit a framed poster depicting a serene, beachy scene. Delilah looked at the poster with longing. It represented the view she wished she had. But Delilah didn't have an ocean view. She had a view of dumpsters and the filthy backside of the 24-hour diner where she worked. She didn't have serenity either. She had her annoying neighbor, Mary, who continued to sing at the top of her lungs, "Thank you, thank you, thank you for starting my day." "Who sings about alarm clocks?" Delilah snapped, groaning and rubbing her eyes. It was bad enough having a singing neighbor. It was 1,000 times worse than the singing neighbor made her up her own stupid songs and always started her day with one about an alarm clock. Weren't alarm clocks bad enough on their own? Speaking of which, Delilah looked at her clock. "What?" she catapulted from her bed. Grabbing the little battery-powered digital clock, Delilah glared at its face, which read 6:25 a.m. "What good are you?" Delilah demanded, tossing the clock onto her bright blue comforter. Delilah had a pathological hatred of alarm clocks. It was a vestige of the 10 months she spent in her last foster home nearly 5 years before, but life in the real world required use of them, something Delilah was still learning to deal with. Though now she'd discovered something she hated worse than alarm clocks that didn't work. Delilah's phone rang. When she picked it up, she didn't wait for the caller to speak. Talking over the sound of clattering plates and a hum of voices, she said, "I know, Nate, I overslept. I can be there in 30 minutes. I already called in Ryan to cover. You can take her 2 o'clock shift." Delilah sighed. She hated that shift. It was the really busy one. Actually, she hated all the shifts. She hated shifts, period. As a shift manager at the diner, she was expected to work whichever shift best fit the overall schedule. So her days varied from 6 to 2, 2 to 10, and 10 to 6. Her body clock was so messed up that she was practically sleeping while she was awake and awake while she was sleeping. She lived in a state of perpetual exhaustion. Her mind was always murky, like fog had rolled in through her ears. Not only did the fog dampen her ability to think clearly, it also made it difficult for her brain to interface with her senses. It seemed as though to her vision, hearing, and taste buds were always a little off. "Delilah, can I count on you to be here at 2? Nate barked in Delilah's ear. "Yes, yeah, I'll be there." Nate made a growling sound and hung up. "Love you too," Delilah said into the phone before she sat down. Delilah looked at her queen-sized bed. The thick mattress and her special memory foam pillow beckoned like a languid lover, inviting her back to bed. Delilah so wanted to give in. She loved sleep. She loved just being in her bed. It was like a cocoon, an adult version of the blanket forts she liked to build when she was little. She'd spend all her day in her bed if she could. She wished she could find one of those stay-at-home jobs that let her work in bed in her pajamas. It wouldn't be ideal for her employer because she'd rather just lounge about and sleep, but it'd be better for her health. She could set her own shifts if she worked for herself. But all her searching for such a job had found nothing but work-at-home scams, the only place that would hire her after she and Richard split up with the diner. All because she had a juvie record and had dropped out of high school for reasons she barely remembered anymore. Life sucked. Delilah looked at her useless alarm clock. No, she couldn't risk it. She had to stay awake. But how? Next door, Mary was on at least the third repeat of her stupid wake-up song. Delilah knew it would do no good to bang on the wall or go next door to ask Mary to keep it down. Mary wasn't cooking with all her burners. Delilah wasn't sure what was wrong with the woman. She just knew that her previous complaints had disappeared into the void that seemed to make up the mind hidden under Mary's thick grey hair. Delilah didn't want to stay in her apartment and listen to Mary. She might as well do something useful. Shuffling into her tiny pink-tiled bathroom, Delilah brushed her teeth and dressed in grey sweats and a red t-shirt. She figured she might as well go for a jog. It had been at least 3 days since she'd gone exercise. Maybe that had something to do with the fog in her head. Nah, she knew that wasn't true. She tried exercise as a solution to her constant exhaustion. It didn't seem to matter how much she worked out. Her body just didn't like bouncing from one schedule to another like a hummingbird flitting about. "It's just because it's winter," Delilah's best friend Harper said. "When spring comes, you'll wake up just like the flowers." Delilah had doubted that, and rightfully so. Spring was here. Everything was blooming, except Delilah's energy levels. But whether it would help her head or not, Delilah put on her running shoes and tucked her keys, phone, some money, driver's license, and a credit card into her running pouch, which she then hung around her neck. Leaving her little noisy apartment, Mary was still singing, Delilah stepped out into a carpeted hallway that smelled like bacon, coffee, and glue. What was with the glue? Delilah snorted as she trotted down 3 flights of narrow, uneven steps. The super was probably fixing the wall or something. She wasn't exactly living in an upscale place. 2 sullen, slouchy teens ambled through the building's lobby as Delilah reached it. They eyed her. She ignored them, stepping through the scratched grey metal door just in time to watch the sun duck behind a fluffy white cloud. It was one of those bright, breezy spring days that Harper loved and Delilah hated. Maybe if she lived on the coast or in a forest, she could appreciate the happy sun and the sprightly air currents, surrounded by nature and maybe some blossoming flowers. Such a day would feel right. But here in this urban conglomeration of strip malls, machine shops, car dealerships, vacant locks, and low-income housing, bright and breezy wasn't pleasant. It was jarring. A tiara would look more suitable on a pig. Trying to ignore smells of rotting lettuce, exhaust, and rancid frying oil, Delilah propped her foot on the side of the empty flower planter in front of her grey-walled, boxy building. Maybe it would feel more like spring if the planters were growing growing flowers instead of rocks. Delilah stretched, then shook her head at her negativity. "You know better," she scolded herself. Setting off at a medium-paced jog, Delilah pointed herself north, which would take her through the nearest housing area, where she could run past houses and trees instead of struggling businesses and cars. She needed to get out of this dark spiral she was in. She had enough therapy when she was in her teens to know that she had an obsessive personality. Once she latched onto a perspective, there was no unlatching her. Right now, she was stuck on the idea that her life sucked. It was going to continue to suck if she didn't pick up a new idea. As her feet met the uneven sidewalk, Delilah tried to clear the fog from her brain by thinking happy thoughts. "Every day I'm getting better and better," she chanted. After 10 rounds or so of this affirmation, she was starting to feel snarly, so she traded affirmations for an image of the life she wanted to be living. That made her think of the life she had been living with Richard, which just dropped her further into the negativity pit. When Richard decided he wanted to replace his dark-haired, dark-eyed missus with a blonde, blue-eyed wife, Delilah didn't have many options. She'd signed an agreement before marrying Richard. Oh my gosh. She had nothing going into the marriage, and she got nothing in the divorce. Well, not nothing. She received enough of a settlement to get her an apartment, some second-hand furniture, and her 15-year-old tan compact sedan. She got these after she found the one place she was willing to hire her and train her. Given her stunning resume of completed half of 12th grade, babysat and worked in a fast food restaurant, she was lucky to get what she got. And awful hours aside, the job had been good to her. Nate had sent her to management training, and she had climbed the ladder from server to shift manager in just a few months. At 23, she was the youngest shift manager in the restaurant. "See," Delilah panted, "things looking up." She clung on to that tenuously positive thought as she jogged through the ratty old neighborhood that backed onto an industrial park. The neighborhood was too run down to be called pretty, but it was filled with beautiful old maple trees and tall, sinewy poplars that swayed in the gentle wind coming up the street. All the trees were filled with light green, new growth. The tender leaves encouraged more hopeful thoughts, if only for a minute or two. She wondered if the people who lived in the area ever let the trees inspire them. Looking around, she doubted it. A few listless kids were waiting for the yellow school buses that belched diesel fumes as they came chugging up behind Delilah. An old guy with a shiny bald head mowed a yard full of weeds, and a woman whose attitude appeared to be worse than Delilah's stood on her front porch glaring into a coffee mug. Delilah decided she'd had enough of the neighborhood, and enough of her run, for that matter. She looped around a defunct car parts store and aimed for home. Home. If only it was home. But her apartment wasn't home. She'd had 2 homes in her life. One she shared with her parents, until they died when she was 11. The foster homes she had lived in after they were nothing more than places to bide her time. Her other home was with Richard. Now she just had a place where she slept, and she never got to sleep enough. Lately, it felt like life was just one annoying sleep interruption after another, like the world was an alarm that kept going off and waking her from her dreams, the only place she could find a truly happy thought. Back in her apartment, Delilah did her best to ignore her mostly empty pale green walls. She hadn't gotten up the oomph to repaint since she'd moved in. She took off her shoes and put them neatly by the door. She crossed to a well-worn beige leather love seat and straightened the green and yellow Afghan draped over its back. What does any of that mean? I don't know. Delilah didn't like the Afghan. I feel like I'm saying that wrong. Like someone from Afghanistan? Afghan, okay. Whatever. But Harper had crocheted it for her. One day, Harper had dropped by and was crushed when she didn't see the Afghan. Let's just say scarf. Let's say it's a scarf. A lovely scarf. After that, Delilah had let it out. "You just have to be careful to tuck in the wonky bits," Harper told Delilah when she was presented the gift. Given that there were many such bits, proper tucking was challenging. Mary continued warbling next door as Delilah peeled off her sweaty t-shirt and opened the cabinet where she kept her stash of cookies. The cabinet was empty, of course. Sighing, Delilah opened her refrigerator. She knew that was a futile action, because she didn't cook and therefore kept nothing in the fridge but bottled water, apple juice, and half-eaten carry-out food from the diner. One of the perks of working at the diner was that she got 2 free meals every shift. That kept her pretty well fed. So all she really needed were her cookies, milk, some protein bars, and frozen dinners for the night she didn't work. The refrigerator revealed that she needed not just cookies but milk too. Mary's voice wafted through the wall. "Spring has sprung, and worms have come." "Yes, that's what I'm afraid of, Mary," Delilah said. She couldn't stay here. Striding into a small bathroom, Delilah took a lukewarm shower, then dressed in brown leggings and a gold and black plaid jacket. She avoided looking in the mirror when she dried her wavy shoulder-length hair. Delilah didn't wear makeup anymore. Rather than spend money on cosmetics that got her unwanted male attention, she left her face bare and put the extra dollars in her savings account. Even without makeup, Delilah was pretty enough to turn heads. A modeling agency she applied to once told her that she was just a large chin shy of having classically beautiful features. 2 agencies had given her the names of plastic surgeons and told her to come back after she had a little chin and jaw work done. Delilah figured if she wasn't going to put on makeup, why look in the mirror? She knew what she looked like, and lately she wasn't too keen on meeting her own gaze. She saw something there that scared her, something that made her wonder what the future held. Next door, Mary was singing at the top of her lungs about visiting Mars. "You go, Mary," Delilah said, wishing Mary would go to Mars and not come back. Grabbing her purse, Delilah headed for her car. She figured she could get to the store, get some cookies and milk, and still come back in time to take a little nap before work. After a visit to the grocery store replenished her oatmeal cookie stash and her milk supply, Delilah left the store from the rear of her parking lot. She liked weaving her way back to her apartment on quiet neighborhood roads instead of the congested 4 lanes that ran through the heart of the industrial and retail splat she lived in. This neighborhood was a little nicer than the one she ran through. It had bigger houses, greener lawns, and newer cars. The trade-off was that the older neighborhood had those big maple and poplar trees, and this new neighborhood had runty cherry trees. She had to admit that the pink blossoms were pretty though. Turning the corner next to a particularly flowery tree, Delilah spotted a garage sale sign. Its arrow pointed straight ahead, so, on a whim, she went that way. 2 more signs directed her to take right turns, and eventually, she found herself in front of a 2-story Spanish-style home looming over several card tables piled high with household merchandise. Delilah couldn't help herself. She had to stop. Just as Delilah had a thing about getting stuck in a thought pattern, she had a thing about garage sales. She'd been hooked on them since she was a teen. One of her therapists, Ali, had a theory about it. Ali thought Delilah loved garage sales because they gave her glimpses into her family life. They reminded her of what normal looked like. Delilah wasn't an obsessive garage sale shopper. Yes, she did occasionally buy... She got on all her current furniture for garage sales. Mostly though, garage? Delilah was a garage sale watcher, an archaeologist of household items, a stuff private eye. She wanted to know what people used, what they collected, what they loved, and what they didn't want to keep around anymore. It entertained her. Figuring her milk could sit in the car for 15 minutes or so, Delilah pulled her car behind a dirty red pickup. The pickup and a powder blue Cadillac were the only cars parked in front of the house. Just 2 people wandered among the tables. One person was a heavy-set woman who seemed intent on kitchenware. The other was a slight young man who was browsing piles of books and records. Delilah nodded at them both, and also at the middle-aged woman who sat next to a picnic table that held a metal cash box, a pad of paper, and a calculator. "Welcome," the woman called out. She had short, brown, spiky hair, and her eyes were encircled in heavy black eyeliner. She wore a yellow running suit, and she carried a butterscotch-coloured chihuahua that was so quiet and docile. Delilah began to wonder whether it was real. But when she stepped up to pet it, the dog wagged its tail. "This is Mumford," the woman said. "Hello, Mumford." Delilah scratched Mumford's behind the ears, becoming Mumford's new best friend. Strolling away from Mumford and his human, Delilah explored the intriguing piles on each table. She poked through small appliances, tools, games, puzzles, electronics, and clothes, finding a black leather jacket that intrigued her until she sniffed it and got a nose full of stale mothballs. Wandering to the next table, she found herself in the toy section. A glance at a pile of fashion dolls darkened her already precarious mood because the dolls reminded her of how impossible it was to prevent other foster kids from playing with her stuff when she was growing up. Blocks made her think of the little foster brother she'd gotten close to in foster home number 3, only to lose him to adoption a week before she was moved to a different home. She was getting ready to walk away from the table in search of home decor items when her gaze landed on a different doll. With brown curly hair, big dark eyes, and a plump pink cheeks. The doll looked almost exactly like the baby Delilah had envisioned having someday with Richard. At the start of their marriage, her baby was as real to her as anything in the physical world. She'd been sure she was going to be a mother, so sure that she named the baby before the baby was even conceived. Her name would be Emma. Intrigued, Delilah circled the table to get closer to the doll. Tucked in a large wooden box full of plush toys and electronic gadgets, that pretty baby face was partially shadowed by the doll's blue hat. The hat's wide brim, fringed in pink ruffles, looked incongruous, wedged between a games console and what looked like a remote-controlled aeroplane. Delilah had to shift both items to free the doll, which was about 2 feet tall. Wearing a puffy-sleeved 1980s-era bright blue full-skirted dress with pink ruffled trim and a big bow around the waist, the doll was much heavier than Delilah expected her to be. When she examined the doll, Delilah realized this was because the doll was electronic. Delilah reached for the bright pink tag and instructional booklet that hung from the doll's wrist. "My name is Ella," the tag read. Ella, so close to Emma. Delilah felt an odd tingle slither through her body. How weird was that? A doll that looked like her long-desired baby, and a name that was far too close to be a coincidence? Although it had to be a coincidence, didn't it? Delilah opened the little booklet. Her eyes widened. Wow, this was a high-tech doll. According to the booklet, Ella was a helper doll, manufactured by Fazbear Entertainment. Fazbear Entertainment, Delilah whispered. She'd never heard of it. The booklet had a list of what Ella was designed for, and the list was impressive. Ella could do all sorts of things. She could keep time and serve as an alarm clock, manage appointments, keep track of lists, take photos, read stories, sing songs, and even serve drinks. Serve drinks? Delilah shook her head. Looking around, Delilah was relieved to see that no one was paying attention to her interest in the doll. Mumford's mum was helping the young man looking at records. The heavy-set woman was busy piling china plates next to the metal cash box. No one else had shown up. Delilah kept reading. Ella, the booklet said, could test the pH levels in water, and she could also do personality assessments when you answered a program list of 200 questions. How is it possible for an old toy to be that sophisticated? Both Ella's design and that of her booklet suggested that her clothing matched her year of manufacture. She was not new, not even close. Did she really do all these things? Delilah turned Ella over, and she found a note pinned to Ella's dress. The note explained that the only one of Ella's functions that worked was the alarm clock. Delilah flipped Ella again, and she saw that Ella had a small digital clock embedded in her chest. Concentrating on following the instructions, Delilah attempted to activate the alarm clock feature by pressing a sequence of little buttons found on Ella's round belly. Delilah nearly dropped poor Ella when the last button she pushed made Ella's eyes bolt open. She sucked in her breath at the snapping sound, and her heartbeat quadrupled in a nanosecond when Ella went from asleep to awake in an instant. Delilah held Ella out in front of her. Well, she did need an alarm clock. She checked the little white price tag stuck to the back of Ella's neck. Not too bad. Delilah could handle that, and maybe she could get the price down. Her hundreds of garage sale visits had turned her into a pretty good haggler. Delilah picked up Ella and headed toward Mumford and his mum, who were both back behind the cash box. The young man was loading a box of records into his pickup. "Will you shave $15 off this price?" Delilah asked, "since she only has one function." The woman held out a hand with bright red fingernails. She turned Ella over, looked at the price, then looked up at Delilah, who tried to look eager and poor at the same time. Okay, sure, I can do that. Delilah grinned. Great. As she paid, she instructed herself to notice that her day did indeed get better as it went along. It didn't suck to have a nice run, buy more cookies, and find a very cool high-tech doll for a good price at the garage sale. Ella would make a cool conversation piece to perch on Delilah's old oak coffee table. Harper was going to love Ella. And now Delilah had a working alarm clock. She could go home, take a nap, and still have a way to be sure she got up in time for work. Yep, things were looking up. Maybe she could get off the life sucks track after all.